Hello, welcome to Gardener's World, and a rather special Gardener's World today, because we're going to devote the whole programme to trees and celebrate their wonder and magic and mystery. And I'm here at Nantebedd, which is the creation of Sue and Ian Mabberley. And what they've done is establish this magical garden set deep in the forest in the Brecon Beacons. Coming up on today's programme, Nick shares his top tips for choosing the right tree for your garden.
No matter if your garden is large or small, or in the city or in the countryside, I reckon there is a tree to suit virtually every space.
Arit talks to the environmentalist Al Gore about the importance of planting more trees for the planet.
Gardeners can play a key role by helping to enhance awareness of the role the natural world plays in stabilizing and protecting our ecological systems and the integrity of those systems.
We meet a bonsai enthusiast who has perfected the ancient art of creating these living sculptures.
This is a Linisra that came from a hedge, and it's something that you can root very, very easily and look after very easily.
And I meet the world's leading tree authority, Tony Kirkham, to discuss the role that trees play in our ecosystem.
Our native oak plays host to something like 2,300 species. It is an incredible tree.
Now, our films from your gardens in today's programme are an expression of your love of trees. And the first of these comes from Merseyside.
Hi, my name's Rebecca and I live just outside of Liverpool with my husband Ross, and I'd love to give you a tour of some of the trees that we've got in our garden today. Our garden isn't a huge garden. 60 foot by 24 foot. We've managed to fit in over 20 trees. So I think it's safe to say that we love our trees. Quite possibly my favourite tree in the garden has to be the golden Indian bean trees. I just love the foliage so much. They've got these beautiful, big, heart-shaped leaves that are tissue paper thin, and they're the most vibrant shades of lime green. Our golden Indian bean trees are grafted, which is brilliant for a smaller garden, as it basically means that the stem will stay at that height, and only the head of the tree will grow. And we're hoping that these trees will grow together and form an archway. Another tree that we love are the standard ginkgos, and we actually have 3 of these planted in a pebble trough in the patio, and we've added some alpines at the base for some extra interest. The foliage on these is lovely. It's such a unique shape. It's almost got frills, and in the autumn the leaves turn a buttery golden yellow colour, which just extends that period of interest. So hopefully you've enjoyed having a little look around all of our trees, and maybe it gave you some ideas of some trees that you might like to add to your own garden.
I think Rebecca's garden looks absolutely fantastic, and it does show you that you don't need a great big space to do extraordinary things using trees in your garden. Now, recently I went to visit a garden, Hargis Croft Gardens in Kington in Herefordshire, to meet the great tree expert Tony Kirkham. And we walked through the Arboretum there on a very rainy day to discuss the role of trees in our gardens and indeed in our lives. Tony, I think everybody would agree that trees are wonderful, but why? What's wonderful about them?
When we think about the benefits that trees provide us with, so without trees we wouldn't be able to breathe. They take carbon dioxide, bank it into the tree, so they make wood from it, store it, and then give us oxygen in return. So we desperately need that.
Does it have to be trees? There are lots of plants that will do that as well, aren't there?
There are lots of plants, but the trees are the workhorse. So, for example, Monty, an oak tree, about 100 to 150 years old, if we took every leaf off that tree and laid them side by side on the ground, we would cover an area the size of a football pitch. And you imagine the work that's doing, photosynthesizing, taking in carbon dioxide and giving us the oxygen that we breathe. I think that really puts it into perspective. They are incredible machines, really, and sometimes we take them for granted.
One of the things that has become really topical, and rightly so, is the role of our gardens for wildlife.
Yeah.
Now, I know that trees are an integral part of that, but to what extent? How important are they for wildlife?
It's the habitat, really, that they provide for wildlife. So, for example, our native oak plays host to something like 2,300 species alone. That's fungi, lichens, mosses, insects, mammals, birds. And of those 2,300, over 300, 320 to be precise, are what we call obligate species. So they will only live on the oak. They can't live on anything else.
Trees bring countless benefits to our world. But the challenges they're facing are growing year on year.
Generally speaking today, the biggest threats to trees are changing climate. So the seasons seem to be merging and we're going away from 4 seasons into 2. So autumn merges into winter and then spring merges into summer and plants get mixed up. Remember, trees have been around for millennia and over a very short period of time, 45 years that I've been working with trees, that has been a very big change. Trees need a rest. So trees are like you and I, we need our sleep. If we don't get our regular sleep pattern, then we're a bit grumpy, a bit moody, a bit stressy. And it's the same with trees. They need that winter dormancy just to relax and rest and get everything back to normal, ready for the next growing season. And that rest period's getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And then the growing season where they have to work is getting longer and longer.
The fact that our world is more interconnected than ever is causing problems for trees.
Well, the main thing now is the threat from introduced pests and diseases. I mean, when I started, probably the same as you, Monty, Dutch elm disease was the thing. We were all terrified of Dutch elm disease. Yeah. But it was the only one. Now the oaks are threatened with acute oak decline, sudden oak death, and then in pest terms, oak processionary moth. And so the list is growing, and there's a whole range of pests and diseases that aren't necessarily here yet, but we don't want.
So what can gardeners do to mitigate those problems?
The first form of defence really is prevention.
Not bringing in any plant material when you travel.
Don't be tempted. When you go on holiday, you see an olive or something and you're tempted to bring cuttings back or seeds. Don't do that.
The problems that trees are facing can seem overwhelming, but we can all play a part in turning this around. What should we as gardeners be doing?
We could all help by planting a tree. And if you think, if everybody with a garden planted a tree, 20 million people, 20 million trees, that would be a massive step forward.
In terms of wildlife, there's a general perception that native trees are better.
I think we should be planting more diversity, different species. I mean, look at this tree. This is from China. It lives up to its name. It's Sorbus splendens. All these berries will be eaten by birds, so even exotic trees are good for bird species. And when we go to a nursery, we should be deciding what do we want from our tree. It's usually ornamental attributes, so good bark, good flower, good fruit, a nice shaped leaf, autumn colour. And if we can tick all those boxes for a tree, then that is a really hard-working tree and deserves that position in the garden. So let's all plant a tree.
I'll be chatting to Tony later on in the programme, talking particularly about the way that trees communicate with each other. It's absolutely fascinating stuff. But you may feel that with the best will in the world, you simply can't accommodate a tree in your garden. You may not even have a garden. But think again, because there really is a tree for every situation and every garden. There are trees that you can grow on balconies, trees that you can grow in a pot on a windowsill. And if you want to find out more, then one of the best places to go is a flower show. And a few weeks ago, Nick went to Chelsea in search of tree inspiration.
Ideally, every garden could and should have a tree, but it's really worth doing your homework. Getting the right size tree, the right size space is so important because you're not just planting for now, you're planting for the future.
With a huge variety of trees to choose from, it's a good idea to consider not only your climate and soil conditions, but also your budget and how long you're willing to wait to get that fully matured effect. With bigger trees, you're buying time, but don't be afraid to plant a sapling and watch it grow. Young trees often establish better.
"30 years ago, I started my first job in horticulture, which was working on a tree nursery. And I spent that first summer bent double budding and grafting trees, a huge proportion of which were malus, or crab apples. They were hugely popular back then, and they're just as popular today.
And rightly so, as they provide so many seasons of interest and are great for wildlife, as the fruit provides food through autumn into winter. There are lots of varieties to choose from, meaning there's something for every size of garden. Some will even grow in containers. As with any tree, always be sure to check the ultimate size, what soil and light requirements your tree needs, and you can't go wrong.
Now, this particular cultivar, Winter Gold, will go up to about 4 metres, and it starts out in spring with a mass of white blooms, which are brilliant for pollinators. It then produces these fruits, which are initially green and then take on this lovely golden tone in late summer and into autumn. Now, they persist well into winter, so they're brilliant food for birds, but you can get in there quickly yourself. Then you can harvest them and make wine or crabapple jelly. But if you want an even more compact tree, it's worth thinking about a cultivar called Red Jade. That's a weeping form, and it only goes up to about 2.5 metres. It's absolutely covered in glossy red fruit, which also lasts well into winter.
Crab apples are easy to grow. They'll cope with a bit of shade, but the fruit will ripen even better in a sunny position.
So it's well worth having a look around and seeing which malus is going to suit your garden.
In my book, the best small garden trees are those that provide you with interest throughout the year.
One of my absolute favourite small garden trees is this. It's Rhus typhina, and this specifically is a cultivar called Dissector. It's called that because you've got these really sort of chopped up, fine leaves. On the ordinary form, they're solid leaves. It's incredibly adaptable, so it'll grow virtually anywhere in the UK. Now, it's a great small garden tree because it will only go to about 2.5 metres tall, but it's got interest throughout the year. So you can see the old flower heads here from last winter, And then the flower heads that have been produced this year, and they'll persist all the way through winter, even when the leaves have dropped off. Now, the leaves are pretty much the star of the show. In fact, I defy you to come up with a tree that has better autumn colour than this. It's got a fantastic range of really vibrant red, orange and yellow leaves that persist for about 3 weeks. It does come with one small challenge, and that's down at the root level. Its roots are fairly determined to run and send up new suckers. So they'll travel out from the centre and then suddenly send up a new tree. Simple way to manage it is to just put in a barrier underground which will prevent those roots of spreading.
There are plenty of trees that will grow happily in a container, given the right care. And growing a tree in a pot means you can have one almost anywhere in the garden, even on a patio or balcony.
If you are looking for a compact, evergreen statement piece for a small garden or a courtyard, then I reckon that this is the tree to go for. It's Pinus mugo humilio. Now, unlike most of the pines, which are absolutely vast, this one is naturally a baby. In fact, it's known as the dwarf mountain pine. Now, this particular specimen is 50 years old, but it's something that you can start yourself at home with a medium-sized specimen and gradually train it over the years. And I think it adds that fantastic sort of oriental look to small spaces.
Like most pines, Pinus mugo isn't particularly fussy about its soil type, as long as it isn't heavy clay. It will benefit from regular watering in the hottest of summers, as its roots lie very close to the surface of the soil.
Has to be said, there's a pretty fine line between what constitutes a large shrub and a small tree. And this is a prime example. It's a brilliant plant. It's called Heptacodium myconoides. It's often known as seventh son of the seventh son, and that's because of the way its flowers are structured. So you've essentially got a cluster of 6 flowers with one in the centre. Now, it really is the large shrub or the tree with it all. Right now, we're in late summer going into autumn, and it's covered in massive blooms, which are absolutely loved by pollinators. But once the flowers have dropped, those calyces, those little pink supports on the back of the flowers, sustain until November or December. So it almost looks like a pink flowered shrub. Then through the winter, you've got these fabulous sort of ghostly stems. You can see the bark is peeling off in beautiful strands. Now, it's genuinely small, so it'll never get to more than about 4 metres or so high. And of course, because it's got that open quality, it's good as a host for other plants. So things like Viticella clematis, which flower in the end of autumn, would be absolutely perfect to grow up through this. So for an all-season large shrub or small tree, I reckon Heptacodium myconoides is the one to try.
One way to maximise your vertical space and ensure you get the most from a fruit tree is to grow one against a wall or a fence. And espaliered apples and pears are ideal for this.
Now, this particular specimen is a conference pear, and this is probably about 50 years old. You can see it's seriously gnarly. But if you want to grow them yourselves, you can buy them pre-trained as a relatively young tree, 2 or 3 years old. Once they're in the ground, they will fruit in 1 to 2 years' time. Or you can just take a tree yourself and gradually train it over the years. Both pears and apples can be grown in this way. Now, you can see there's a basic T framework here from which all of these spurs emerge, and it's these spurs that produce the fruit. And so they need to be pruned during the winter down to about 2 buds. And what you'll find is in spring, they come into bloom, masses of white flowers, brilliant for the pollinators. Then you'll get embryonic fruit through summer and then harvestable fruit in the autumn. You can grow espaliers in a number of different ways. The classic thing is to grow them against a wall, trained out flat, but you can equally put them onto a garden fence, or an interesting way to use them is mid-garden, so virtually use them as a screen or a fence. And so if you're looking for a compact tree that delivers lots of interest and is productive, then it's really worth considering growing espaliers. No matter if your garden is large or small, or in the city or in the countryside, I reckon there is a tree to suit virtually every space.
I agree with everything Nick says, but there aren't many gardens that could accommodate these Douglas firs. It's not so much the footprint, it's how they soar up into the air. This is about 85 years old, and yet already it's 150 feet tall, and there is no other living thing on the planet that can match it. Now, still to come on today's programme. Arit chats with the former American Vice President and environmentalist Al Gore about what we can all do to protect our trees and his mission to get us planting more.
Worldwide, there's now a global effort to plant 1 trillion trees, but we have to plant the right kind.
We climb high into the canopy of a Staffordshire woodland to explore the very latest in cutting-edge carbon science.
We are taking the laboratory out into the forest and asking ourselves how that forest will respond to the changed atmosphere that will be all around everybody by the middle of this century.
And we get a masterclass in how best to plant a tree when Toby visits a North London school.
I actually have to name it. I name everything.
Ted?
No, it's not Ted.
Aww.
But first, we're going to Aylesbury to meet a bonsai artist.
The ideal tree will look like a mature tree with ideal proportions, something that you can stand underneath, sit up around the base of the trunk and look up into the leaves. My name is Harry Harrington and I'm a bonsai artist. When I worked as a gardener in my 20s, I would see these trees that the owner of the garden had, and they were just saplings in pots, but I would see them every day. And having this tree in my hand, for me, was just an amazing feeling. And that is the very essence of bonsai for me, is you have this beautiful living entity that you can capture and nurture and look after. There was a big mystique about bonsai, and it was seen as something very unattainable. But I think in the past 30 or 40 years, particularly in Europe, we've realised that you can use very, very common European trees. In bonsai, we have naturalistic styles and we have abstract styles. And a naturalistic tree is a tree that you would see growing in a field or on the horizon. Abstract styles will be more caricatures of trees. They may have cloud pruning, or they may be something that is a thing of beauty but doesn't look like a tree that you would ever actually see in nature. If you try and bring a tree inside for a day or two, that's absolutely fine, and it's something that's very traditional for the Japanese to show their one tree for a few days. But if you try and keep a tree inside on a long-term basis, it will just gradually diminish in vigour and health. When we have a branch that's not pointing in the right direction, what I'll do is I will coil copper wire around that branch, and this enables me to place it exactly where I want to within the design of the entire tree. I can put bends into the shoots and I can completely redirect them. The wire then holds that branch in its new position until it's set, which can be anything from a few weeks to 6 months later. Then the wire is cut away. So when we're designing the tree, we're designing the branches, but we also design the roots and the surface roots, and they're very important. Something we call the nabari, We have various techniques, including growing a tree on top of ceramic tile to ensure that it grows lateral roots and no plunging roots. And after 4 or 5 years of growing in the ground, you can actually have quite an impressive nabari build up. So this is a great piece of material for a bonsai. This is boxwood. It's 20, 30 years old. It's been dug out of the ground and it's survived. It's got a new root system growing, and the important thing is it's got a nice fat trunk on which to start developing branches and start putting a design into this plant. However ugly it is now, you could turn it into a beautiful bonsai in 10, 15 years. So this is a Linicera that came from a hedge and was just a basic block of wood, and it's something that you can root very, very easily and look after very easily, and they're great to style. To your right is a privet, and this again came from a hedgerow as a big lump of wood, rooted really easily, and over 15 years I've developed it and developed it, and again very easy to look after species. One of the lovely things about having a bonsai collection is you will start to associate some of your bonsai with different events in your life, whether they're good or bad. You'll remember the times where things have been a bit of a struggle and you've gone out into the garden, worked on a tree, and just been able to relax and get away from life. I have one tree that I obtained a trunk literally the day before my daughter Alice was born, and this was 11 years ago. So Alice's tree has taken a journey alongside my daughter growing up, and that gives it some additional poignancy. There's also trees that I have photographed my children alongside in various stages of both their development, and it's lovely to look back and see how everything sort of grows together as you nurture them. So I think when you accomplish a design in a tree, particularly after 10 or 15 years, there is a buzz. It's something that you've created yourself, and it can only improve as time goes on. And it will outlive me and my children and my grandchildren.
Whenever I see bonsai created with the same sort of skill and experience that Harry has shown in his, I always marvel at the fact that these are old, mature trees, sometimes as old as a big oak tree, but just condensed and distilled down into miniature. They really are completely fascinating. Earlier in the programme, I was chatting to Tony Kirkham, the great tree expert at Hargis Croft Gardens, and our talk turned to the way that recently more and more discoveries are being made about the ways that trees communicate with each other. We've been discovering more and more about what you might call the secret life of trees.
Well, you're absolutely right. We are learning more about how trees communicate to each other. They do talk to each other, but in a different way to what we do. First of all, underground, there's an incredible network going on between tree and fungi. There's mycorrhizal fungi that's connecting all the roots together. We call it the wood wide web. They work together in a symbiotic relationship, sharing resources. So the trees are the host, the fungi helps the tree, and all the resources are switching from one tree to another and from the fungi to the trees. So if a tree feels a bit under the weather, then the other trees will help it and bring it back. I can give you an example. I went into a redwood forest and saw an albino redwood, pure white. Now that tree can't survive without chlorophyll. It had zero chlorophyll. The only way it could have been growing happily and healthily is by other trees supporting it.
As well as helping and nourishing each other, trees also seem to have developed early warning systems for dealing with the threat of certain pests.
I've seen oak trees where they've been under attack from winter moth, but when those groups of caterpillars get too big or too large for a branch or for a leaf, they can reduce respiration, increase the tannin levels in the leaves, so the leaves become very bitter to the caterpillars. Then the tree can communicate to other trees and say, you need to shut down and make your leaves unpalatable for these caterpillars. How they do that is probably emitting pheromones through the leaves, so through smells and taking smells in through respiration, electrical impulses, and also through the root system.
You would think that in survival of the fittest, individual trees would be trying to outcompete their neighbours, not to work with them.
Yeah, you would, but remember in a woodland Monty, it's about building a community that gives them the protection from winds, from weather, animals, etc. So it's about building that family and that community that can survive better in numbers rather than on their own.
The information that we are discovering about this wood wide web is endlessly fascinating and surprising. What do you think that we don't yet know about trees? Where is research taking us?
Well, it's certainly taken us to give us a better understanding of trees, and I think there's a long way to go yet. Yeah. So, for example, I know there's research being done on how trees like pines, when they're under attack from aphids, they can send out a scent, a pheromone that ladybirds pick up, and that scent is like blood in the sea to a shark. It attracts the ladybirds that come in and then eat the aphids and manage the aphids for the pines.
So they're not just communicating with each other, they're communicating to insects and other creatures.
That's right, yeah.
Extraordinary.
There is so much to learn, really, isn't there, about how trees work and this communication.
I was left with so much to think about from my day with Tony, but certainly this idea of trees communicating underground and through their leaves is mind-boggling. And sitting here, you realise that all these thousands of trees in the landscape are all interacting together, speaking a language which we can only hear the faintest whispers of.